15 years ago, the Davis City Council established the Poet Laureate position, whose charge is to leverage the poet's artistic excellence and literary achievements to inspire the diverse residents of the Davis community to read, write, perform, and appreciate the written and spoken word. Earlier this month, the city council, inducted Mercedes Ibanez to serve as the city's sixth poet laureate. Her term will run from October 24th through September 2027. Mercedes was born in Peru and has lived in Davis since 1976. She is the author of 5 books of poetry. She won the National Award in Literature in Peru in 1971, and her translation of one of Ezra Pound's poems was published in 1973. Mercedes recently published a poetry book, Poems from the Roof, recounting her time at local poetry readings here in Davis. Mercedes, welcome to In the Studio on Davis Media Access.
Thank you, Tim.
Well, Mercedes, I thought it might be nice to set the tone of our discussion by leading off with one of your poems. Would you mind reading the poem Balloons for us?
Yes, I will. Balloons. Please don't bring me balloons for my birthday. I don't like to see the air captured and stretched inside to send a message that has nothing to do with its captivity. One time, I sang to a balloon for a few days until the air came out slowly and flew out of the window. Is it that I am inside of a balloon, suffocated by the outdoor noise and the TV news? My inner peace seems to be in danger of extinction. Don't spoil my birthday with paradoxical and controversial presents. A card will do.
Mercedes, thank you for reading that. That is very special, and I want to point out that that is from your new collection, Poems from the Roof. I can get this
Yeah.
right here, Poems from the Roof, which is actually connected to your time at the Thursday night poetry readings, I believe, in Davis, and that's a
Yes.
picture here on the top of the Natsulas Gallery where those events are held and hosted by Andy Jones, who has
Yeah.
been on our show, by the way, in the past, and he has been a wonderful guest. So
Oh,
I want to go get straight to the heart of things here, and that is to ask you why you write poetry. Of all the things you could be doing in your life, why is it poetry that you spend your time with?
yeah. I write poetry because for me it's like breathing. I don't ask myself why I do it. I just do it. But I have been doing it since I was a child, and it's kind of part of me. Like when you know how to roller skate, you roller skate, and that's what I do, and it's always fun.
Hmm. I think that's
Express
probably the best answer. I'm sorry.
no, it's expressing everything.
Yes, yes. Well, in this thing then that you can't help but do, what are some of the themes that are important for you to address in poetry? And by the way, if I might add sort of a sub question to that, I'm curious whether you are driven by the interest in particular themes and finding ways to explore and articulate on those, or whether you just you write poetry and whatever comes out comes out.
Yeah. I don't have an agenda because I am not kind of professional poet. I just write because I look at something and I need to write it. Like I look at a butterfly and I need to write about it, and I think about a fly that passes by, or somebody who dies, or somebody who had a baby, or something. Everything in life is an excuse to write.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I like that. That could be a nice subtitle for our interview here today, an excuse to write, or any excuse to write. Um, well, speaking of writing, you have written in both Spanish and English. You've published poetry in both Spanish and English.
Mhm.
And I'm really curious about that bilingual experience. And I'm curious if you feel like you write, if you'll pardon the generic sound of this, but do you feel like you write different poetry in each of the two language? I mean, either in terms of the things you write about or the way you structure the poem. I mean, obviously the language is different, but are there other, is there a way you could say that, well, those are my Spanish poems, those are my English poems, or not?
Yeah. Um, I don't know how to answer that very well because it's almost like sometimes I feel like my brain is cut in two pieces, like one left and one right, and sometimes they get together. But because I have been living in the States for so long, my part for English is almost covering the whole part. So,
Mhm.
but I part of me is still a Spanish speaker. Sometimes I think, how do you count in your brain? When you're counting something like birds are passing by. Okay, you want to count them? I count them in Spanish, but
Hmm.
it's a way you go to school and you learn what life is all about. The
Mhm.
basics are in Spanish, but the adopted family is English. So
Mhm. Do you compose in Spanish anymore?
sometimes I do, but I don't do it too much because sometimes my thinking of Spanish is a little bit nostalgic. It's a little bit kind of
Mm.
missing the things that I miss. Let's say a mountain or a beach or something, and so it's a little bit nostalgic and a little bit sad, and I try to avoid it.
Okay. Okay.
That's the
Uh,
truth.
okay. Well, I'm going to ask you to read another poem, if you will, which certainly does harken back to your time in Peru, and may have a
Yeah.
little nostalgia in it, but it was written in English. So if you could read Grandpa for us, I think that would be wonderful.
Okay. My grandpa. His name was Ernesto Rosasa Barone. Grandpa Grandpa loved candy, and he was diabetic. We all sang to him with grandma, please, please don't eat candy. But Grandpa stashed his candy in his boots and under his pillow. He went through the diabetes torture, amputation, gangrene, and when he died, we thought he would hide candy in his coffin. Years later, we all gathered to remove his rests to the city. The grave workers hammered and hammered his stone to remove his body from the grave. And there he was, a brown sugar, skinny gingerbread man, ready to be scooped up to join his wife in the long, sweet night of death.
That, I mean, it brings me to tears. I mean, it makes me laugh, but it also brings me to tears. That is such a tender uh, description of your grandfather, and the picture of him, the thought of him hiding candy in the coffin is just beautiful and humorous.
Yeah.
Um,
It's almost like, I
well,
guess that's the way addiction is because I think he was addicted to candy. He
mhm,
loved
mhm,
candy at any moment of the day. It was almost like comfort food. The candy that you
and
wrap in cellophane? He had it in his
right,
pocket.
right, right, and I want to make sure I get it right. uh, ready to be scooped up to join his wife in the long, sweet night of death. Again, just a beautiful metaphor. Well, uh,
Mhm.
speaking of your grandfather, it reminded me, and I noticed that in the press release announcing your appointment as the poet laureate for the city, your role as a mother and a grandmother was actually figured, I thought, fairly prominently and up top in that description of who you were. Um, and a number of the poems you've written that I've read, including the one you just read, certainly touch on family relations. So, kind of back to the question I asked a moment ago about themes. How important is family to you in your poetry, and what do you what do you believe you achieve or accomplish, or what are you able to express by exploring family in your poems?
Mm. I don't know exactly how important my grandkids are for my family, but I know that when you have a child, you look at the child like a miracle. That you said, "Oh my God, I had this kid for 9 months, and now he's here, wanting food or wanting something," and that kind of magic goes to a grandchild. When you see your own child having a child herself, it's amazing. You know when the time comes for you to have that experience. It's an amazing experience. And my grandkids are very lucky because they are surrounded by love 100%. And I just love them, and their parents love them, and they are full of love themselves. So they are part of my poetry because they are part of my life, and I see them constantly, either on the phone or in person, or I go there and they come. And we are
Mhm,
a very close knit family because we are immigrants after all, and I don't have anybody else but them. So
mhm,
I wish I can have more family that I can go to Ohio or to New York or to
mhm,
Colorado, but this is it. We are
mhm.
here.
Okay. Well, you are a master of many things, I understand, not just poetry, but also playwriting. You've done a number of, written a number of plays. And I'd be curious to know how, what you see as the relationship between poetry and playwriting. Or, I mean, is there some things you can do in one and not the other? Do you see them as continuations of one another? How do you see that connection?
Yeah. I adore theater and playwriting. And if I could be doing that every day, I would, I think. It's just that um, playwright is almost putting magic on a stage, and people who take over the magic to present it according to their own nature. And so I've written a few plays, and I have some friends who became the characters, that children and grown-ups, that they were such a pleasure. It's a pleasure when you write and scene and movement of people in a stage, and then you see some people doing it that way, some people doing it that way. It's so much. It's so rewarding. But I haven't done it enough. I have done it a few times, and I would love to do it. Maybe I'll do it soon. And poetry comes in because when you talk about an action, sometimes there's a metaphor that comes in and takes over the action. Or you don't talk about the action, but you talk about the metaphor. So I love to go
Mm.
to theater too, and I go to any theater that is in the Mondavi.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to say that the Mondavi were our guests about a year ago to
Oh, that's
celebrate one of their
nice.
important anniversaries. So that was very nice. Well,
Oh,
may I ask you to read yet another poem, the poem
okay.
Butterflies, for us?
Okay. Butterflies is kind of an unusual poem because I was a little upset one time when I saw this community that the butterflies had come and they have taken all their vegetables. But um, I wrote this poem a long time ago, and I'm sorry, butterflies, but this is done. Butterflies. Yes, you are beautiful, but also dreadful, and also dangerous and daring. To survive, you go anywhere, the same anywhere all the time. You are not domesticated. Nobody puts a bowl of food in front of you. You fly free with those honorary wings, and we forgive you because their colors are magic. You can decimate a small rural farm in no time. You can slurp berries and vegetables like milkshakes. Entire families in remote areas can go hungry if you pass by. You are beautiful for your own benefit. I dare you to look around and see how free you are for doing good and otherwise.
Well, let's move. There's so much we could say about that, but we'll leave it at your beautiful reading of it. And let's. I'd like to talk just a little bit then about Davis in particular and your role as poet laureate. We here we are far into our interview and we haven't even touched on that. So let me ask you this: how much poetry is going on in Davis? I mean, are we a town of poetry lovers and poets?
Yes, there is a town. This is a town of poetry. Listen, when kids are born, they very soon they start having like Incy Wincy Spider and all kinds of nursery rhymes that are very poetic. The kids are involved in poetry from very early on, and I see that later on they just don't follow that because they are into science and looking at things as they are and describing them as you see them. But the poetry is always there and there is so much support. And I am very happy and humbled by being in the poetry, poet laureate, because we can do activities that will support kids and grown-ups who want to continue the path of poetry.
The title for our segment today was taken from the press release, again, refer to the press release, announcing your appointment as the city's poet laureate. And I was hoping you could say more about what you mean when you say that you look forward to bringing out the poet in everyone.
Yeah. I it's almost like a little um to take a pause in everything that goes on and think of poetry because poetry is expression of emotion. It's an emotion that when you express it, it educates you and others, entertains you and others, uplifts you and others, and it brings communication that is very important. And and I think that in Davis, I would like to do some of that, and I think I have already some ideas about that I would like to do, and not as a competition, but as a propagation of ideas that are poetic and activities that involve poetry.
Well, and then you sort of you went ahead and answered another question that I was going to ask you, and that is about how poetry can bring the community together. And I think you've answered that nicely in that as well. Well, we
Yeah.
certainly look forward to all the ideas that you will bring over the next 3 years as the city's poet laureate, and I hope that you could maybe transition between this interview and that by reading us one final poem, a
Okay.
short poem called "Humming."
Okay. This is called humming. Humming is a song with no words. It's a deep feeling for all that I have loved in my life. I listen to the hums, and they are millenary. They happen when the land was bare and the winds dance freely. These sounds never left and still dance everywhere I go and will stay until time is deep in memory.
Well, Mercedes, thank you, and we look forward to your sounds dancing with us, not just for the next 3 years, but for many years ahead of us here in the city of Davis and beyond the city of Davis, hopefully.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
I have been speaking with Mercedes Ibanez, the new Poet Laureate for the city of Davis. For more information on Mercedes and her work, please visit www.mercedesibanez, first last name all run together.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mercedes.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank all of you out there for joining us. I'm Tim Gaffaney, and you've been watching In the Studio on Davis Media Access.